Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own All That Remains or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by TrueFreak89, and you can find a link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Angela.
All That Remains, Chapter 7. Scylla pushed Rael's shirt over her shoulders while the other girl lay on top of her, kissing her with a fevered intensity. Rael shrugged the shirt off the rest of the way and tossed it aside, letting it crumple in a heap on the floor. The kissing intensified as Scylla closed her eyes and parted her lips. With her closed eyes, her other senses kicked in, heightening the sensation of Rael's silk tongue sweeping over hers, and the scent of soap on her freshly showered skin. Scylla couldn't remember the last time someone had kissed her. Maybe it had been Porter, her ex-boyfriend from a long time before the infection spread. From before she became an orphan, and things like kissing pretty girls or boys had still seemed important. Scylla clung to the other girl, touch-starved and in desperate need of physical release. Above her, Rael grunted, but the sound was far from sexual. Scylla's eyes snapped open as Rael reared back. The other girl's eyes were clenched shut, and her hands balled into fists, gripping the bed sheets. Rael? What is it? What's wrong? Scylla reached forward, but Rael pulled away again, her hair falling into her eyes as she shook her head from side to side. Scylla frowned. Did I read this wrong? No, Rael answered, her voice a low snarl. Rael, look at me. Please look at me, Scylla urged, shifting forward again until Rael did as she asked and stopped Scylla dead in her tracks. The other girl's pupils were the size of pinheads, and her icy blue eyes were wide and unfocused, covered in a thin white film. 1,000 thoughts ran through Scylla's mind all at once, but the most prominent one was this. Rael was infected. Scylla's body came to this conclusion before her mind did, snatching a boot knife from the holster on her ankle. Rael scrambled off the bed, landing on her ass before she rolled onto her knees, doubling over in pain as she clutched her head. Scylla, it's not what... The words dissolved into a high-pitched shriek as what was left of Rael disappeared, leaving a snarling beast in her wake. Scylla froze, the knife clutched tight in her hand. She liked Rael, she really did. The other girl was perhaps the first genuine connection she'd made since her parents died, but that meant little now. Rael's collar was gone. Scylla pushed herself up onto her knees, holding the knife out in front of her in case the thing that had been Rael pounced. To her surprise, the blonde paid her no attention. Standing, she turned to the door instead and started clawing at it, clipped nails raking over the hard steel. The familiar screeching continued, growing louder the longer Rael clawed at the door, until it burst open, knocking her to her ass for the second time in as many minutes. Scylla didn't have time to process what was happening as Abigail and Tally burst in, the former hurling herself onto Rael like a pro footballer and pinning her to the ground. Beneath the much taller witch, Rael writhed and shrieked. Tally rushed forwards, placing her hand to Rael's forehead, and the struggling stopped as sleep took over. Oh, good job, Tell, Abigail said, breathing hard as she rolled off their sister witch. Tally's cheeks were flushed, and she was just as short of breath, as if both of them had been running. Tally, finally catching sight of Scylla, offered the other girl a strained smile. Don't worry, she's okay. She's just sleeping. Okay, she's infected, Scylla spat, her eyes wide and her tone coming out sharper than she intended. She dropped her gaze, fighting back tears. It must have happened before I got to her yesterday. I'm sorry. It's not what you think, Telly started. Raelle is infected, but she's not a freak. She's something else, Abigail finished. What? Scylla snapped. What the hell are you talking about? Telly and Abigail shared a silent look, the kind that spoke volumes without a word being passed between them. It's not her place, Abigail spoke up first. Color can tell you everything when she wakes up, if she wants to. Telly was less defensive as she said, There's a horde passing up top. That's what causes the change. We'll wake her up once it's passed. Scylla's mind was reeling. She had so many questions, but Abigail had made it clear that they wouldn't tell her anything else. It needed to come from Raelle herself. Does this happen a lot? She asked, benching the other, more pressing questions she had until Raelle was awake. It's getting more frequent, Tally answered. Raelle can normally feel it coming on when a horde gets close. Usually, a horde is less than a mile out before it affects her. She's like an early warning system for the base. She must have been distracted this time, Abigail said pointedly, glaring in Scylla's direction like it was all her fault. Will she be okay when she wakes up? She'll be groggy, but she'll be herself, said Tally. The horde takes hours to pass. We'll keep her in the infirmary until then. I'll come find you when she's awake, if you want me to. Yeah, thanks, Scylla nodded. That would be great. She slipped her knife back into its sheath and climbed off the bed, casting a wary glance at Raelle's sleeping form. Outside, thundering footsteps sounded in the hallway before Anacostia appeared at the open door. The older witch stood with her hands on her hips and a frown on her face. She peered around the room, taking in the three girls, and Raelle, unconscious on the floor. I tried calling her on the radio when the horde was spotted. Anacostia walked across the room and plucked Raelle's radio from her backpack. She pushed a button, her frown deepening when nothing happened. How many times do we have to tell that shitbird to keep this thing charged? She was gone for a day, Tally tried to defend her, but Anacostia didn't want to hear it. She gruffly slammed the radio into the charger on a shelf in the corner of the room. That's no excuse. She should have put it on charge the moment she got back, Anacostia growled, shaking her head. She caught sight of Scylla and was reminded that there was a civilian in the room. Are you okay? Did she hurt you? No, Scylla answered. Good, that's something at least, Anacostia said, in her usual curt tone. You two, help me get her to the infirmary. She grabbed Raelle's feet while Tally and Abigail grabbed an arm each. They carried her out of the dorm in a practiced fashion, leaving Scylla alone and at a loss. Every ounce of dodger instinct she possessed told her to run and not look back, but a greater part of her needed to know Raelle was okay. She'd only known the girl a grand total of a day, and yet the quirky blonde had already gotten under her skin. There was something between them, an undeniable spark with the potential to ignite into something more. Scylla took her trusted lighter out of her pocket and flipped it open, marveling at the tiny flame. The battered silver lighter was one of the few things she had left of her parents. She closed the lid and held it tight in her fist. She had deliberately withheld her last name from Raelle to hide her true nature. Ramshorn was far from a prestigious name like Bellwether's, but it was still a noticeable witch bloodline. Scylla had done well to hide her true nature from her fellow witches, but she couldn't trust on that luck holding out for long. Posing as a civilian was easy for a day or two, but the longer she stayed, the greater the chance of someone discovering her secret. Scylla Ramshorn wasn't just the daughter of Dodgers. She had enlisted 3 years ago, entering Fort Salem not only as a private in basic, but as a spree operative. Scylla had made it until her first year of war college before going AWOL from the military. If anyone in the base recognized her, she'd be up before a military court for dereliction of duty at best, and charges of terrorism if identified as spree. The spree had taught her many useful things, far more than the military. With the flick of her lighter, she could disguise herself as General Alder and walk right out the front door without question. But there was still the small matter of a horde of freakers passing by up top, not to mention Rael. Scylla pocketed her lighter. Her luck had held so far. She could afford to push it for one more night, just long enough for the horde to pass and Rael to wake up. Rael was intriguing in more ways than once. Scylla had never heard of anyone becoming infected but not fully turning. Her curiosity couldn't let her walk away without knowing more about Rael Collar. One more night. Waking up, for Rael, wasn't as simple as opening her eyes when Tally's sleep incantation finally wore off. No, it was a case of fighting to the surface of her own mind. The only way she could describe being taken over by the call of the horde was like sinking feet first into quicksand and struggling to crawl back out. She was conscious of everything, but unable to control her own body. Shaking herself out of the living nightmare seemed to grow harder and harder each time she was taking over, and Riel couldn't be sure she wasn't leaving bits of herself behind in the sand each time. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the light of the infirmary. Her wrists and ankles were bound by leather straps, not just to stop her from hurting anyone, but from trying to get to the surface to join the horde that called to her, like the lure of a siren song. Nothing else mattered when the infection took over within her. Joining her brothers and sisters in the horde became her only priority. Once, before they had started restraining her and sedating her, she had clawed at the concrete walls of a cell long enough to turn her fingers into bloodied stumps. It had taken the fixer 3 days to grow Rael's fingernails back. She blinked, her mind still groggy as the fog of the infection lingered behind. Her head hurt and her mouth was dry. It was like having a hangover without the fun part of the night before. Turning her head, she caught sight of Tally and Abigail. Tally sat curled up in a chair with a book, while Abigail paced back and forth. Bellwethers were known for their patience, and Abigail was no different. Doing nothing wasn't in her skill set. "Quit pacing, Bellwether. You're making the place look untidy," Riel croaked, as Tally jumped beside her and Abigail spun around to face her. Their expressions were both fraught with worry, and Riel felt a pang of guilt. She hated putting him through this. Abigail cocked her chin, smoothing over her expression, trying to be nonchalant for Riel's sake. She knew how much the other girl hated them making a fuss over her. "About time, shitbird. I've got better things to do than babysit your lazy ass all day." Rael managed a wry smile at Abigail before Tally threw herself at their sister witch, smothering her in a crushing hug. Unlike Abigail, Tally wasn't the type to hold back her emotions. "Oh, you're awake! You had us so worried. The horde passed hours ago." Rael let out a heavy sigh, letting her head fall back onto the overstuffed infirmary pillow below, while Abigail shot her an apologetic smile and Tally set to work on the restraints at her wrists. "It's getting harder to come back," Rael said, her mouth set in a grimace. "You came back. That's all that's important," Abigail said, stepping up to her role as unit leader and rallying the troops. Riel gave a half-hearted nod as she sat up and rubbed at her wrists. Tally undid the ankle restraints next. "What did you tell Scylla?" Riel asked, a mixture of shame and anger burning hot on her pale cheeks. She must have scared the hell out of the other girl. Riel's memory was hazy. Although conscious at the time, her memories upon waking up always seemed cloudy, like she was watching them through muddy water. "Not much. We thought it would be better if it came from you," said Abigail. Beside her, Tally nodded. "I said I'd tell her when you woke up." "I need to see her. I need to explain." Rael swung her feet over the side of the bed and attempted to stand. Abigail caught her as she went lurching forward, her legs buckling underneath her. "Take it easy, Collar. You've been out for hours," Abigail chastised, as she helped her to sit on the edge of the infirmary bed. Rael sat forward, resting her hands on her knees as she fought the urge to throw up. "Isadora hasn't even cleared you yet," said Tally, fussing over the other girl as she handed her a glass of water poured from a nearby jug. Riel devoured it in one long gulp, before handing Tally the glass back and wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "I'm fine, Tal." She tried to stand again and was caught by both members of her unit this time. Okay, maybe I need a minute, she admitted in defeat as she lay back down. You're not going anywhere until I say so. Isadora appeared, wearing her white lab coat with her hair tied back in a messy bun. The other witch always looked like she was in a hurry to be somewhere, and this time was no exception, as she pulled out a penlight and flashed it in each of Rael's eyes in quick succession. Normal pupil dilation, she muttered, talking to herself as she scribbled hasty notes onto the chart that had been hanging at the end of Rael's sickbed. She set it aside to take Rael's pulse, her lips pursing like she tasted something unpleasant as she looked at her watch. Pulse a little slow. You're out much longer than usual. 136 minutes after the horde was more than a mile out. A new record. Isadora picked the chart back up and scribbled furiously. Lieutenant Quartermain brought you here in full transition. Why didn't you come earlier? We have a safety system set up for this happening, Private Caller. That system fails if... I didn't feel it coming on. I was distracted, Rael replied, sheepishly ducking her head as Isadora's eyes narrowed on her. Rael was painfully aware she was supposed to report to the infirmary whenever she felt the change coming on, and she usually did. But this time there had been no warning, or if there had been, she had missed it. Distracted, Isadora repeated in a clipped tone, finally placing her pen down. Distracted how? I was with someone. I didn't feel the horde coming until it was too late. Rael rubbed at the back of her neck, feeling exactly how she had the first time her mom walked in on her and a girl making out on her bed. The older witch picked up her pen to make more notes, while Tally and Abigail bit back their snickers, and Rael wanted nothing more than for the floor to open and swallow her whole. I'll need to run more tests. The usual. Blood workup, cognitive ability. I just got back to the base, Rael sighed. Cut me some slack, I almost died yesterday. Fine. Isadora relented, tucking her pen into her bun. We can do it tomorrow, but you're not going anywhere right now. You need rest. Rael opened her mouth to object, but quickly shut it again as Isadora shot her glare cold enough to freeze her blood. Fine. I'll tell Celia you're awake. Tally squeezed Rael's arm before leaving, along with Isadora. How bad? Abigail asked once they were alone, taking the seat by her bed that Tally had just vacated. Lying on her back, Rael threw an arm over her eyes with a grunt. She loved Tally. The other girl was like a sister, but there were some things she couldn't share with her, and this was one of them. Bad. I'm getting less warning. It's happening for longer, and it's hard to pull myself back. Rael answered, her voice muffled by her arm. She swallowed, clenching her eyes shut so as not to let Abigail see her tears. If I don't come back, I don't want to be a lab rat, Abs. Abigail moved to take Rael's other hand in her own, doing a better job of holding back her tears. You know I won't let that happen, Caller. I promised you, didn't I? Rael nodded, her arm still covering her face. She had made Abigail promise to put her out of her misery if she ever turned and didn't come back. They are just empty shells. I think it's kinder to end them. Scylla's words rang through Rael's mind, making her think of the other girl. Scylla, how freaked out was she? Abigail shrugged, letting go of Rael's hand as she folded her arms over her chest. There was something about the civilian girl that she didn't like, but it was clear Rael was into her. Abigail would keep her opinions to herself, for now, at least. She was about 5 seconds away from taking you out when we burst in. She was freaked, obviously, but she seemed okay when we left. Blamed herself, thought she hadn't got to you in time. We told her you had been infected for a long time, and that's it. We left the rest for you to tell her. Thanks. I was hoping I wouldn't have to tell her so soon. I'm trying to convince her to stay, and I've probably just scared her off. Who the hell wants to stick around for a goddamn freak? Rael slammed her fists off the mattress with a growl. Hey! Abigail caught her other wrist and pulled her arm away from her face to stare her dead in the eyes as she said, You're not a freak. An idiot, maybe, but you're my sister, and I'm the only one that gets to call you that. Got it, shitbird? Got it. Rael smiled despite herself. Thanks, Abs. Don't mention it, just tell Scylla how it happened. You're a damn hero, Rael, and don't you ever forget it.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.